Good morning. I am Emilia Saiz, and I am the Deputy Secretary General of United Cities and Local Governments. United Cities and Local Governments is based here in Barcelona and is the inheritor of a centenary movement of local and regional governments that was founded in 1913. I am very curious to hear about your myth-busting. But I can break you my own news, and that is from the 260,000 municipalities and regional governments that we represent in UCLG. There are very few Barcelonas and very few Madrids and very few Athens, very few of those. And so what we actually need to work on is on changing the narrative on migration, on changing the narrative about refugees. And that's what we are trying to do. And this is what we can do as networks. I mean, we need to face it. Our members are facing very difficult challenges, basically around three things: legislation, capacity, and the narrative. I mean, we don't have populations that are so open to change and so open to receiving new people. Some of them might be, but they receive very strange information, very confusing information. And maybe some of your myth-busting goes around that. So it's certainly something that we want to do. The other thing that seems to be very well understood, and we are all converted in this room, is about the importance of the local level in the international policy making. And this is simply not true. I've just received this morning the draft declaration for the September summit of the UN on migration, and it has no single sentence on local government or on cities. It also has no consideration whatsoever of including these levels of government in the global compact that is going to be shaped following that summit. The summit itself is very important, but if we don't manage, if we as a converted community do not manage to bring this new voice into the discussion, very little will change at national level, and then what the colleagues from Barcelona have been presenting will be the cruel reality of miscommunication between national government and city governments. Not all the cities are Barcelona, not all the governments are Spain. So we also need to keep that in mind. But there is something that is very clear. We will need to change the social contract with the citizenship to talk about a different type of cohesion and inclusion. And unless we do that, we will have problems in the future. We cannot talk about migration flows I thought I had 3 minutes, as something that only relates to receiving. We need to talk about migration flows as pure changes in our society behavior. We also need to change the paradigm in governance. Governance cannot be only vertical. It needs to be horizontal as well, and it has to do with a lot of accountability. And finally, we will need to revise the way that we are financed. We do need a different type of finance to address the type of challenges that we are facing, and that includes the capacity building that Cecile was talking about, and some of the issues that the colleagues from Eurocities and Suzanne was also mentioning. I leave it there. Elevator pitches are very difficult, but I hope I've been clear on this.
Yes, indeed, elevator pitches are difficult, so I appreciate that all of you responded to the bell that you heard. And not to worry, I think each of you has touched on points that I'm going to follow up questions with, so you will have the chance to say more on each of these points that you've raised. And I'm going to frame my questions along the lines of the plans and strategies that are in place to welcome migrants and refugees in cities, the challenges that cities are encountering, and some of the active measures that exist to overcome these challenges through good practices. So I'll start with a question for Suzanne. Asha, I think this allows you to continue what you wanted to say about culture. It was specifically about what is the power of culture and integration in promoting a sense of welcome and belonging, and how can we think about the cultural sector as working together alongside some of the other daily challenges that migrants face, such as access to work, to housing. So how do all these sectors work together? Migrants might have daily needs for protection, for inclusion, at the same time as they want spaces for expression and for interacting with the wider urban population. So could you say a little bit about that?
In Karlsruhe, I can speak about Karlsruhe. We have a round table for all the NGOs, citizens, and culture institutions who are working to create a culture of welcome. The culture institution can't give some housing or work, but they can be good managers to create social cohesion at the very beginning. For example, when we invite newcomers living in the camps in our city to come in our museums and to talk with residents about what they are seeing on the pictures, for example. Then we create a dialogue where the newcomers are teachers to the inhabitants of Karlsruhe, because they bring with them a new, for us very often strange, surprising but very fascinating view on our pictures, for example. And it's a kind of dialogue. And in Karlsruhe is a special situation that we are a city of, transit. So all the people are living in our cities are living in camps. For them, it's very, very important that we as cultural institutions, as artists, as musicians, as painters, invite them to come out of the camps, to come in our city. And the cultural institutions say, so this is your house too. That's the strategy. And for us, we are winners too, because in this dialogue, we develop our own culture institutions, our own music, our own paintings, our own theaters. And the theaters are making pieces with inhabitants and newcomers, and this is several dialogue too. So I think the culture opens hearts, opens the head and the hearts, and can bring something, the ground for the capacity of dialogue on both sides. And the artists, it's really true, they are always international. For most of them feel sometimes in our society as strangers, so they are perfect builders of bridges.
Thank you very much. And I think moving on from a very specific example of Karlsruhe, we have a number of you who are working in networks. In fact, all of you in some form or the other are working in a network, fostering dialogues between cities. And so I think you could, each of you, answer this question, but I'll direct it to Emilia of UCLG. You mentioned there's not all the cities that you work with are Barcelona's or Madrid's or Athens, and so what I'm interested to know is, can you talk a little bit about some of the experiences of smaller cities, maybe cities that are less visible, and their programs of social inclusion, and how the network shares some of these practices or supports cities that might face challenges in that way?
Yeah, well, what we need to realize is that some of the cities that we work with, if you put Beirut, but many of the border cities in Turkey, for instance, they have doubled their population in a very short period of time due to the refugee crisis. That is one reality that is related to the recent crisis that we have seen. And they've been saying this for years, before it hit Europe, actually, and the European Union. So they've been warning us about the challenges that you then have to be able to provide services to a very different type of population and with the same capacities that you had. So our initiative is then to to put these cities together and to help them to think together about the challenges that they face. We are developing a program that around the Mediterranean basin on city-to-city cooperation together with UN Habitat and the International Center for Migration Policy and the Swiss Agency for Development, the European Union. Within this program, what we try to do is to let cities share experiences, define the kind of things that they would like to gather through, and then put them into practice in pilot projects, and define also priorities that they would like to discuss. And some of the priorities that they choose to deal with in this program can be very relevant to understand the overall concerns. I mean, their main concerns is the institutional coordination, this multi-level governance that we were talking about. Many of them simply do not know how to deal with national legislation. They have these people at their doorstep. They need to do something about it. And very often it's not their own competence to do it, like you were describing. So that's it's a big impact for imagining a small city in the border that triples its population with people that do not talk their language, or there are many issues around that. So this multi-level coordination is very important. Then the planning of the city. You need to change the way you look at your city because of these new cultures that come in. You need to take different things into consideration. So the normal dialogue that you would have and the normal consultations that you would have with more established inhabitants that have been there for a longer time, that they speak the language, etc., and that have a certain range of traditions might no longer apply. So this is something that you really need to take into account. And cities like Amman, Beirut, Lisbon, Lyon, Madrid, of Tangier that participate in the program have picked that as a very important issue to discuss. They are also very concerned about education and language, and it's education not only for the new arrivals, but actually for the whole system of the municipality that needs to deal with this. I mean, capacity building is not only about financial resources, but it's also mainly about knowing how to deal with these new actors. And this is something that I'm putting now in the light of this very specific issue around the refugee crisis, but this can also be exported to general migration flows that we see in Africa happening from rural areas to urban areas. They might come from the same country, but they certainly do not talk the same language in most cases, and they are not used to the same type of living conditions, and it's something that local authorities would need to face.
Well, I think